What is up, guys? Welcome back to Core CSS Mastery. We're going to be talking about borders in this lesson. There are three main properties associated with borders that we need to be aware of. We have border color, border style, and border width. We can also use border by itself as a shorthand for describing those three properties. So we have a paragraph of text here. Let's start by adding a border to this paragraph of text. So to do that, we need to make use of the border style property. By default, it's set to none. That's why we don't see a border. And we're going to set it to solid as the value. Let's refresh the page. We can see we now have a border around our paragraph. We can also control the width of this border. So let's set it to 1 pixel. So you can see by default, it was a fairly thick border, but this is what a 1 pixel border looks like. We can also change the color of the border. So let's set that to cyan as a test. Now we can see we have a cyan 1 pixel solid border. Now in terms of some of the values here, for color, we already know how to set colors in CSS. We can use any of the different methods for referencing colors that are available in CSS. As for the style, we have quite a few different options which are programmed into CSS. We have dotted, dashed, solid, which is what we're using right now, double, groove, ridge. Let's try a few of those. So let's take a look at a dashed border. And let's set the border to red so it's a bit more visible. And let's increase the number of pixels. So we'll set it to 3 pixels, which is fairly thick as borders go, but you can see the effect clearly there of a dashed border. Let's have a look at double. So you can see there's 2 lines in that border. Let's try groove and let's try ridge. So slightly different border effects on all of these. In terms of the shorthand property, we could actually summarize all 3 of these rules with a border property and simply type 3 pixels, red, ridge. And if we delete the previous 3 rules, we're going to have exactly the same border on this element. Now we can actually get even more granular control of borders. We can control the individual sides of the borders here. For example, if we change this to border top, it's only going to apply to the top of the paragraph. And there are a range of additional possibilities this opens up for us because, as you can see, when we have one side of a border defined, it's essentially a straight line. So for example, we could use this to indicate a division between paragraphs, for example, if we change that to border bottom. So perhaps we could have a paragraph below the line, and if we always had a border bottom on all of our paragraphs, we would essentially have a horizontal line dividing all of our paragraphs. Another example here, let's just say at the top of our HTML body, we actually have some kind of navbar here. And let's set some styling for the navbar. So we can say nav. Let's set the background color to gray so it's visible. Now we don't see that yet because it doesn't have a height. So let's give it a height of 100 pixels. Refresh the page. That looks quite big. It's because we're zoomed in, so normally it might not look that big. Let's set it to something more reasonable given the current zoom level. So that could maybe be a navbar. Now, if we assume for a minute that it didn't have a background color, well, we can't actually see that navbar at the moment. So what could we do? Well, we could add a border bottom. We could set it to something like 1 pixel solid black. As you can imagine, we can then include our nav items above that line. So for example, here in our nav, we could just paste a few sample headings. We could then turn those into links so that when the user clicks on them, it now functions as a navbar. Now that's obviously a very simplified version of a navbar. We would obviously want to add some spacing for those headings, perhaps so they appear equally or all on the right-hand side, for example. But we can also make use of border as a horizontal divide. So for example, if we style our span elements, we could set border right, 1 pixel solid black. Let's take a look at this. So you can see we have a border or a vertical line separating our headings. Again, as you can see, the spacing's off. This type of thing we could potentially fix with padding, which we'll discuss in the next part of this course. But just to see an example, if we set the padding of this span to 5 pixels, You see we get a bit more space there with our headings. And obviously we would have to set the cursor to pointer as well. Another very useful CSS to remember. And as you can see, we now have a nav. We could even add a pseudo class to this where we say span hover, and we can say on hover background color. Let's set teal. Now when we hover our cursor, we can see there's some highlight going on there. And we don't want to get too carried away with this navbar. The key is that borders don't just have to be a square border around an element. They can also be used to generate horizontal or vertical lines on a page. Now, just a side note on these border bottom, border top, border right, and border left properties, they are in themselves shorthand properties. Notice here for the paragraph with border bottom, we're defining 3 properties at once. So which properties are actually being defined here? What is border bottom shorthand for? Well, it's short for border bottom style. So in this case, the border bottom style is ridge. Border bottom width, so in this case 3 pixels, and border bottom color. Let's set this to a different color just to see the element change. Set it to cyan. And each of these 3 properties is available for each of the sides of the border. So for example, we could just change all of this information to top. Got 3 different properties there. If we refresh the page, that border is going to jump to the top now. Okay, so that's pretty much borders in CSS. Key takeaway here is how to set the border color, border style, and border width properties on an element, and also how to make use of the shorthand version of those 3 properties. Understanding how to style different sides of the border individually, and also being aware of how that opens up the ability to use borders not just for borders, but to potentially create vertical and horizontal lines on our page. Thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next part of the course.